everybody? Brian Miller here from the Star Wars Canon podcast, and it is that time of year again where we are going to sit down and be talking Star Wars Canon novels. We are going to be going worst to first. Now, I'm going to let you guys know ahead of time. Every year I do this video, and it always turns out to be 2.5, 3 hour long video. And we sit down and go through the entire list of novels so far that have come out. Every one of them. Every single one of them. So every year the video gets longer and longer and longer. And a lot of times, most of the time, it's the exact same information being said over and over and over again. You can only talk about Heir to the Jedi so many times before people finally realize you don't like Heir to the Jedi and that it's the bottom of the list. So this year I've decided to do things a little bit differently. We're going to be talking about the novels that have come out since the last ranking that we did, which I believe was episode 23 of the Star Wars Canon podcast. That was in May of 2019, and we've had several novels come out since then. I didn't do a ranking video at the end of last year, and everybody's been asking for a ranking video, so I think now is a good time to be doing this. I'm also going to be sitting down and doing the comics. That video should be coming out in the coming days as well. But for tonight, we're talking canon novels, and I think there's 16 novels that have come out since the last ranking video that I did. So let's get into this. Now, before we actually start with the ranking video, I want to let everybody out there know, because there's a lot of people going to be watching this watching this video on this channel for the first time and just now finding us. This list is just simply my opinion. This is just my personal ranking. This isn't based off of polls or what the overall community is saying about these novels. This is just my personal opinion. Your opinions on these novels will probably be a little bit different than mine. Your ranking will probably be a little bit different than mine. Some of you may have a very different ranking video or a ranking list than I do. And there's nothing wrong with that. I hope you guys have a different list than I do. If we all agreed up, on the same things all the time, what would we have to talk about? You know what I'm saying? So this is just my opinion. Don't lynch me. This is just me putting that out there. These are what I think of these novels so far. So I wanted to throw that out there real quick. Also, before we get into the ranking itself, I wanted to let you guys know we have a Discord server now. If you guys want to talk Star Wars with us in a non-toxic environment, come on over to our Discord channel, the Star Wars Canon Podcast. A very non-toxic community there that you guys can talk Star Wars and literally any subject you can think of in Star Wars. There's a channel there for it. Also, for our Patreons, we have a couple of special channels on there. We've got one that's a voice chat that we're going to start utilizing after the first of the year, and we've also got a special how would I describe it? A special channel for you to request certain reaction videos. So if you guys want a reaction video out of anything, you guys can go over there and check that out, and we'll be looking at that also. And you can throw mailbag questions for the podcast on there. There's literally nothing you can't do on that Discord server that has to do with our community. It's growing every day. I'm very excited to have so many people on it and to have it so that we can actually sit and talk Star Wars with you guys, whether we're on air or not. So definitely go check that out. Also, there's going to be links in the description of this video to help keep the Star Wars Canon Library mobile app going. That mobile app is available on Google Play now. It'll be coming to iOS spring of 2021. A full color-coded timeline of everything canon so far, cover art for everything, links where you can purchase everything, and everything like that. So definitely go check that out as well. Very excited about that. And the next episode, the last thing I'll talk about before we get into this, the next episode of the Star Wars Canon podcast that's coming will be coming after the first of the year. We're all going to be getting back together, and we're going to be talking High Republic. We're going to be kicking off High Republic in the next couple weeks, and I'm very, very excited about it. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into this. All right, this is where the fun begins. We are talking 16 novels tonight, and at the end, like I said, at the end of the video, I'll show you guys where they all fall on the overall ranking of how many novels we've got so far. So here we go. Let's kick this off, man. Number 16 that has come out since May of 2019. Number 16 on my list is the first Alphabet Squadron novel by Alexander Freed. It was released on June 4th, 2019. Takes place about 4 years after the Battle of Yavin, so pretty soon after Return of the Jedi. Follows an Imperial defector named Erica Quell as she's recruited by Harrison Dula for Alphabet Squadron. The their main mission is to hunt down Shadow Wing, which is this highly skilled TIE fighter squadron that's out there. There were some pretty cool parts in this book. There were some pretty neat parts in it. But I don't think there were, just me personally, I don't think there was enough in this book to really get it higher on the ranking than this. I wasn't a huge fan of it. It took quite a while for me to get through the book, but like I said, there are some very cool moments in it. One of the biggest problems I had with this book in particular was some of the names that Alexander Freed made for Star Wars characters. A lot of these names were just either so long, they had so many different names that he called them by every single time. You know, first, middle, last, couple of middle names, whatever. A lot of these names really took me out of the Star Wars galaxy, because I spent more time trying to figure out how to pronounce the names than I did reading some of the stories, or reading some of the chapters. And eventually, for Kirsty and I, it turned into a game. Every time I come across a new name, I'm like, babe, check this name out. And I try to pronounce it for her, and she's like, what? Like, yeah, there's some weird names in here. That was one of the things that kind of took me out of it. The other thing is, for me personally, and don't get me wrong, I know there's a series of Legends books out there. Richard J is a huge fan of them. The Squadron, the Rogue Squadron books, X-Wing books. I know they're huge. They got a huge following. But for me personally, I've always had a hard time kind of reading space battles. It's kind of hard to envision what's going on, because there's so much going on in a space battle that it's hard to describe it all at once. Which is why, you know, I've always said I wanted to see the Battle of Jakku on screen. I don't want to read the Battle of Jakku anymore. I want to see the Battle of Jakku. It's just a little thing that kind of, it's just kind of one of my little quirks, I guess you could say. But there was a conversation in this book that I really enjoyed. And at one point, Alphabet Squadron, it wasn't Alphabet Squadron, it was one of the other pilots, I think, that ended up joining Alphabet Squadron, was stranded out in space, and Shadow Wing was out there somewhere. They didn't know where. And he decides to put out a radio broadcast to anybody listening to kind of maybe try to relate to some of the TIE fighter pilots, because they're all pilots. You know what I'm saying? They all have the same mindset. It's just they're on different sides. And he starts talking with this TIE fighter pilot, and eventually the conversation turns into the TIE fighter pilot telling Will Lark, this character Will Lark, you're going to die out here. You're going to rot out here. I'm going to kill you. You're going to rot out here. And it's in more words than that. I'm paraphrasing. But that conversation was absolutely awesome to read. It was absolutely great to read. It gave me chills while I was reading it. It was wow. You know, so like I said, this book does have some moments in it that are really good. I'm not going to ruin anything for you guys in this book if you guys haven't read it, but it's all right. It's not the greatest. It took me a little while to get through, but like I said, it's number 16 out of 16 that has come out in the last year and a half for me. So wasn't a huge fan of it, but like I said, you guys may enjoy it. I know there's people that comment on the podcast quite a bit that said they really enjoy the Alphabet Squadron series, and that's awesome. I'm glad they do. So like I said, that's just my personal ranking. Number 16 for me is Alphabet Squadron by Alexander Freed. Number 15 on my list moving forward is the next Alphabet Squadron novel called Shadowfall, also by Alexander Freed, released June 23rd of 2020, takes place about 6 months after the first novel, so still about that 4 ABY section, or that period. We're following Alphabet Squadron as they're beginning to have some trust issues with one another. Their backgrounds are starting to kind of come to the forefront. Certain allegiances that people have had in the past is causing problems with people who had other allegiances in the past, stuff like that. And they're beginning to be torn apart. Now, Hera Syndulla and Alphabet Squadron are still trying to catch Shadow Squadron, and they hatch this elaborate plan, almost a Palpatine-worthy plan, to trap Shadow Squadron, to catch them, and to end what they're doing to the galaxy. This novel was better than the first one. I really did enjoy this novel more than the first Alphabet Squadron book, and I think it's because we're finally getting into the meat and story of this, or the meat and potatoes of this story. This is supposed to be a trilogy. This is the second book in a trilogy of novels. We've got another novel coming, you know, early next year. It'll be the final novel in this trilogy, and you can definitely tell this is a trilogy. This is definitely the Empire Strikes Back, I guess you could say, esque installment of this trilogy. It really ends on a dark note, and it really takes some of the characters from the first book and drops them into situations that have nothing to do with piloting anything. No dogfighting, nothing like that. I mean, it's really interesting, the dynamic with some of these characters and how they're putting some of them together. So I do enjoy this Alphabet Squadron a little bit more than I do the second one, and honestly, this one's got me excited for the third book a little more than I already was. Which isn't a whole lot, to be completely honest. But if you're reading this trilogy and you don't like the first Alphabet Squadron book, give it a chance, get through this one, and then you'll come into the second book, and I promise you it's going to be a lot easier to get through. You don't have as many weird names getting dropped. You're already building on characters that were there from the first book, and it's really something to sit and to read. I see the problem also is I did not read these books back to back. I read them as they came out. So there were some novels that came out in between that kind of make you forget about a couple things that happened in the first book until you start talking about them in the second book again. You're like, oh, that's right, that did happen. I forgot about that. So if you're sitting down and you're reading them back to back, I think it's going to be a different experience than what maybe I had sitting down and reading one, waiting a while, reading a second one, and now reading other novels before I pick up the third one again. So honestly, my opinion of Alphabet Squadron so far, these two novels being at the bottom of the list, I would, if you haven't read them yet, I would almost hold off on reading them until the entire trilogy is out so that you can sit down and just boom, boom, boom. I almost think that would be the better way to read these novels. So I did enjoy this one quite a bit more than the first one, and honestly, it's got me kind of looking forward to the next one. So that's really all I got to say about that one. Moving on to number 14 is A Crash of Fate by Zoraida Cordova. Now, you guys have heard the name Cordova in Star Wars before. This woman has got Star Wars characters named after her now in Jedi Fallen Order and in the Jedi Fallen Order Dark Temple comic. Crash of Fate was released on August 6, 2019. Takes place about 34 ABY, so it's about the same time as Last Jedi, Force Awakens, right before the Rise of Skywalker. This book follows two friends, Izzy and Jules. They're on Black Spire Outpost on Batuu, which is the land that is the planet that Disneyland's Galaxy's Edge is kind of based off of. This book came out during that time period where literally everything was Galaxy's Edge. Galaxy's Edge, Galaxy's Edge, Galaxy's Edge, Batuu, Black Spire, everything was Black Spire and Batuu. And that may be part of the reason why this book is so low on my list, is because at this point I was getting fatigue of talking about Batuu. Every single book we read had mentions of Batuu in it, and Black Spire, they really, really pushed their Disneyland thing. Quite hard, to be honest. But anyway, let's get back into the story. Izzy and Jules, they're from Black Spire Outpost. They are best friends, one male, one female. And in the middle of the night, one of them, I don't remember which one it was, I think it was Izzy, their family uproots in the middle of the night and just leaves, and she's not able to say goodbye to her friend Jules, who's a farm boy there on Batuu. Years later, she comes back as a smuggler. She's in the middle of this mission trying to deliver a package to Doc Ondar, and she runs back into Jules. And honestly, it turns into kind of a tweeny love story at that point between these two. It really had a Most Wanted vibe to it. And if you guys have seen my other ranking videos, you know I wasn't a huge fan of Most Wanted, which was a Han Solo and Kira story. It really had vibes kind of tying to that. So it was a little bit harder for me to get through this book. Luckily, it's a young adult reader, so 4 or 5 hour read and you're through it. But there were some things in there that were redeeming, and the book wasn't all bad. But like I said, it really did have that kind of tweeny love story feel to it. And the whole thing takes place right there on Black Spire Outpost. And there's even a little bit of a tie-in to Rise of Skywalker. I think what they meant to do was a tie-in to Rise of Skywalker, and I think it fell flat, to be completely honest. It does have a bit of a tie-in to another book we're going to talk about here in a little bit, Black Spire, which was just Galaxy's Edge Black Spire. There's a little bit of a tie-in with that as well toward the end, but not a whole lot. Considering those two books came out back to back, it makes a lot of sense that there's a little bit of a tie-in. Other than that, the two have nothing to do with each other. So Crash of Fate is pretty low on my list. If you don't read this one, you're not going to miss anything in the galaxy. It's not like this one is essential reading. This book isn't like Lost Stars, where I believe Lost Stars is essential reading. I don't think Crash of Fate is essential reading by any means. If you've read everything else and you just want to read a Star Wars book, pick it up and check it out. But otherwise, you're not going to miss anything in this one. So take that as you will. That was number 14 on my list. Number 13 on this ranking is another young adult reader called Force Collector by Kevin Schnick. Schnick, I think is how you say his name. It was released on October 4th of 2019. Takes place about 28 years after the Battle of Yavin. So this is set before the events of Force Awakens. It follows a young boy named Carr as he begins to manifest Force abilities. He has this, I don't remember what they call it, the psychometry or something. I don't remember exactly what the term was, but it's the Force ability where you touch things and you kind of see where they've been and you experience what what those objects experienced. And he doesn't know anything about his lineage. He doesn't know if he has any Jedi in his past or anything like that. And he runs into this other girl and they go on these adventures and he's trying to prove that the Jedi even existed. Because at this point, the Jedi are myth and legends and whatnot. And he goes off and he starts finding all of these important artifacts. And some of the artifacts in the book, were things that we've seen before in the films, like Sharut's staff that Sharut had in Rogue One. That was one of them. He touches it and he sees Sharut and kind of his fight with the stormtroopers there on Jeddah. At one point, they go to Jakku and they find the Millennium Falcon sitting outside of Nema Outpost, and they go on board the Millennium Falcon. And I think I'm trying to think what it was that he touched. I think it was the training remote that he touched. And he was seeing visions of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke training there on the Millennium Falcon during A New Hope and stuff like that. But one of the items that he ends up touching, and it was kind of funny the way they wrote it. He ends up at Maz Kanata's castle. And you know how Maz Kanata is kind of connected with the Force, and she can sense that in other beings and whatnot. And she senses his abilities, and they're getting stronger and stronger as he goes through the book. So she's like, I've got the perfect thing for you to touch. Let's see what you see when you touch this. And she brings out a golden protocol droid arm. And Carr touches it, and he basically sees the entire Star Wars saga up to that point, episodes 1 through 6, in his mind. He basically sits and watches both the prequel and original trilogies in his mind, because this is the arm of C-3PO. This is the arm that 3PO got ripped off in the C-3PO Phantom Limb comic. How Maz Kanata got this thing, I have no idea. I haven't the slightest clue, because the last time you saw it, it was being swallowed by some creature on the planet that they were all on, that the droids were all on. So I don't know how she got this arm or whatnot, but he basically sits down and watches the entire saga at that point. This one took me a little while to get through, and mainly because I just had a hard time staying interested in it. It drug out in some spots, and for me personally, it got to a point where I was just like, man, are they going to do anything in this book? You know what I'm saying? So, Force Collector, excuse me. So Force Collector is number 13 on my ranking. Number 12, let's move on, is Spark of the Resistance by Justina Ireland. It was released on October 4th, 2019. It's in the same vein as like the Smuggler's Run, Moving Target, Weapon of a Jedi books, Cobalt Squadron, Before the Awakening. It's in the same vein of those books, a little 3-hour young adult reader. It takes place about 34 ABY, so this is leading up to The Rise of Skywalker. This book takes place between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. We follow Rey, Poe, and Finn on an impromptu rescue mission on the Falcon, and Rey is beginning to unlock more and more of her Force abilities. There's there's beings on this planet that they go to that can recognize the Force in Rey, and they're kind of seeing what she is and whatnot. But basically, they end up having to defend this planet from the First Order. They find this laboratory on the planet, and they're basically defending these primitive people from the First Order. The story itself is pretty unremarkable. It's pretty cookie cutter from some other little stories you might read here and there. There wasn't a whole lot to it. It was basically pretty cut and dry. Just what they were doing was what they were doing. It doesn't really add anything to The Rise of Skywalker, if you're kind of wondering about that. It doesn't really add anything to any of the films, to be completely honest. But it does kind of... It's basically just a little adventure with with the new A team, if you would, with Rey, Poe, and Finn, and with the Falcon and Chewie and BB-8. That's basically what this is. It's just their way of at least putting out a story other than the Rise of Skywalker that follows all of these characters, so that it does feel like they're an important group in Star Wars. Basically, is all it was. So, like I said, the story was pretty unremarkable. And you're not going to miss anything if you don't read that one as well. So figured I'd throw that out there also. Number 11 is a novel that I mentioned earlier. It's Black Spire by Delilah S. Dawson. It was released on August 27th, 2019. Takes place about 34 ABY during and after the events of The Force Awakens. And I'm pretty sure this leads up to The Rise of Skywalker the same way the Crash of Fate kind of led up to it. But it was a little bit different in this aspect. This is a direct sequel to the Phasma novel. And the reason I say that is, Phasma was also written by Delilah S. Dawson. So these are characters that she has helped create and help shape and mold and whatnot. If you've read Phasma, you're probably sitting there going, how is this a direct sequel? Now, this isn't a sequel to the Phasma stuff, to the flashback stuff with Phasma's origins. This is a direct sequel to the quote-unquote present-day events that happened in Phasma. So whenever you would fast forward to, Vi Marati being tortured by Captain Cardinal in Phasma, those are the events that this novel is a direct sequel of. So this novel is following Vi Marati as she's sent to Batuu, to Black Spire Outpost by Leia, to establish a new resistance base, to start recruiting for the resistance, and she takes Captain Cardinal with her. And what's left of him, because if you've read Phasma, you know kind of where he was at the end of that novel. And she takes him with her. And her ship ends up crashing on Batuu, and her and Captain Cardinal have to start a base from scratch, and she's forced to work in the scrapyard and try to earn credits, and she's trying to get to know the townspeople, and she's trying to lay low from the First Order and whatnot, and trying to build this base outside of town and to recruit. So that's basically all this one is. And like I said, this one leads right up to a point where I think it had something to do with the Rise of Skywalker, but I'm not entirely sure. And if you've read the book, you kind of see you know what I'm talking about, because at the end of Crash of Fate and at the end of this novel, the same basic thing happens. And how it ties into the Rise of Skywalker, I have no idea. I think it was meant to tie into what was going on with Episode 9. And I think maybe they must have changed something in Episode 9 somewhere, because this doesn't really match up. A lot like the Star Wars Allegiance comic, the 4-issue run that came out, which we'll talk about in that video. How it supposedly led up to the Rise of Skywalker, and then we never heard another word about why that was left off the way it was. However, this book was a little more fun to read than Crash of Fate was. And I remember, I was at that point where I was getting that Black Spire fatigue. But the way this book really sat and explored the outpost a little more and kind of fleshed it out a little bit, excuse me, it was a lot easier to get through. And you start to see that these characters are more three-dimensional, and you see how everybody else is, I don't want to say related to everybody else, but what their relationships are with other people in the town. And it really did flesh out Black Spire a little bit more, to the point where I'm even more excited now to go to Galaxy's Edge at some point than what I was when I just read Crash of Fate. So I really, really did enjoy Black Spire quite a bit. And like I said, all the sequel stuff to Phasma, which was weird, because if you watch some of my old rankings, even if you look at the last ranking, episode 23 of the Star Wars Canon podcast, I was not a fan of Phasma. I really wasn't a huge fan of that novel. But moving forward, the way that Delilah S. Dawson made this a sequel to that book without making it a sequel to Phasma was absolutely ingenious as far as I'm concerned. So this is a great book. You guys need to go check this one out. I don't want to say that it is essential reading. I'm not going to go that far. But if you're looking for a really good Star Wars adventure, this is the one for you. So definitely check out Black Spire, Delilah S. Dawson. Top 10. Here we go. Number 10 on my listing is Queen's Peril by E.K. Johnston. Released on June 2nd, 2020. It takes place about 32 years before the Battle of Yavin, making it basically an extended version of The Phantom Menace, but from Padme's point of view. This novel is a prequel novel to Queen Shadow, also written by E.K. Johnston. Basically what this story is, if you guys have read Queen Shadow, you know that was the story of Padme at the end of her queenship, at the end of her being queen and the new queen asking her to be senator, and it was basically her learning how to be senator after the events of Phantom Menace. This one goes to the opposite end of the spectrum to when she is elected queen, and the first few pages are basically the election and how she's dealing with it, and that the fact that she is elected. And it tells its own story up to a certain point, and about halfway through, it turns into it goes right into the Phantom Menace from Padme's point of view. And what this story basically is kind of the introduction of the handmaidens. We saw the handmaidens in Queen Shadow and kind of their relationships with each other, with Padme. But in this book, we really see those relationships begin and what started those relationships, and how Captain Panaka is the one that kind of put all of these girls together. And it kind of shows how some of them maybe didn't get along at first, and then eventually they ended up, becoming very, very close in Queen Shadow. This book also does a really good job of showing just how far out of his league Captain Panaka actually was, trying to keep Padme safe, a 14-year-old girl safe, with all of these other 14-year-old girls wanting to do 14-year-old girl stuff. And it really shows, honestly, I can't believe he didn't have more gray hairs in the Phantom Menace than what he had because of these girls. Even in that small time frame from when she was elected to when the Phantom Menace kicks off, I'm surprised he didn't have a lot more gray in his hair. I'm not going to go into detail about maybe some of the situations that were kind of brought up. Just think teenage girl stuff that maybe Captain Panaka's wife had to be like, that might have something to do with it, sweetie. Just kind of think about that for a second, and you'll kind of figure out where I'm going with that. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. I did not like it as much as I did Queen Shadow. I will say that. I did not like this book as much as I did Queen Shadow. I really, really loved Queen Shadow. But this one, like I said, just the first half of it is basically its own original story, and then it goes into the Phantom Menace, and then it's just a rehashing of everything that we basically saw. It does cut back to Theed a couple of times during the Phantom Menace while Padme and her handmaidens are out in the galaxy, whether they're on Tatooine or Coruscant. It does cut back to what's going on Theed with maybe some of her other handmaidens that stayed behind with Governor Sobibble and stuff like that. But other than that, it really doesn't add a whole lot to the Phantom Menace. And it as a prequel novel to Queen Shadow, I totally get it. It totally makes sense to me why they did what they did. But had E.K. Johnston just written this book as its own story and then had it leave off with the beginning of the Phantom Menace, I think it would have really hit home a lot more for me. But it is what it is. I did enjoy the book quite a bit, and I definitely think it's worth picking up, especially if you're a Padme fan, considering there's not a lot of Padme-centric stuff out there. You've got Queen Shadow and Queen's Peril. She has a pretty good role in Thrawn alliances, but other than that, there's not a lot of Padme stuff out there. So if you're a Padme fan, go check out this book. You won't be disappointed. It is actually a pretty good read. Number 9 on my list, moving forward, is Resistance Reborn by Rebecca Roanhorse. Resistance Reborn was released on November 5th, 2019. Takes place somewhere between 34 and 35 ABY. And it's basically the Resistance A-Team is on a mission to rebuild the Resistance after Crate. Oh, no way. You guys couldn't have figured that out from the title, to be honest. But this is an interesting novel. I really, really like this book. This novel is basically a really good sequel novel to the Aftermath trilogy. If you've read the Aftermath trilogy and you really enjoyed where that book went and those characters and kind of what that was about, you're really going to like Resistance Reborn. We follow a lot of the same characters. Nora Wexley's there with Wedge and Snap Wexley, now obviously grown up. And I guess I need to tell you, this book does take place between episodes 8 and 9, in case you guys didn't pick that up from context. Not trying to insult anybody's intelligence. But But there's other characters also that popped up in this book. We saw Uncle Shiv from the Battlefront 2 campaign with Zay Versio, who we know is Iden Versio's daughter. They pop up in this book, and this is basically, I mean, Maz has a pretty good role in this book as well with Poe, and you kind of see Poe and Maz's relationship. But this is a good novel. This is a really, really good novel, and I was excited to read this one from the get-go. At one point, they even go to Braca from Jedi Fallen Order. They're on the same kind of trains that Cal Kestis was on with, I can't remember what his friend's name was at the beginning of the game that the Inquisitor killed, but they're on that same kind of train. And I mean, there's a lot to this book. There's a lot of callbacks to other canon in this novel. This is the kind of novel that, for people like me, maybe you guys that really keep up on Star Wars canon, these are the kind of novels that really help pay off keeping up on. It's kind of a reward for keeping up with all this stuff, which we'll talk about here in another novel coming up. But this is a really good novel, and it explains why everybody had a problem with The Rise of Skywalker, me included. I had the same problem, and this novel really does kind of explain that. How at the end of episode 8, they put out this call saying, hey, it's now or never, come help us, and nobody shows up to Crate. And then all of a sudden in episode 9, Lando can just show up with thousands upon thousands of ships. It kind of explains that a little bit, kind of what was going on behind the scenes that we didn't see in the movies and stuff like that, what the First Order was up to, why nobody showed up. So should they have explained that in the novel instead of the movies? No, I do agree with that. But this book does do a really good job of explaining that. And it's a really fun novel to read. There's a lot of times in it where you're going to laugh your butt off. And especially the stuff with Wedge and Nora and kind of where they're at when Snap finds them. Absolutely great novel. So Resistance Reborn was a really, really good one. And like I said, this is a great sequel novel to the Aftermath trilogy. And it's also a really great prequel novel to the Rise of Skywalker novel. Not the Rise of Skywalker movie, but it's a good prequel to the Rise of Skywalker novelization, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. So take that as you will. Really, really enjoyed Resistance Reborn. Buzzed through it in about 2 days. I couldn't put it down. I was real happy with it. It was a little bit shorter than I thought it would have been, but not bad. It wasn't as short as like what I guess how Heir to the Jedi ended, how it was just real abrupt, how that one was just, it was all climax and then boom, just ended. It wasn't like that, but it did seem like it could have gone on another 30, 40 pages and it would have been all right. So Resistance Reborn is number 9. Number 8 this year on this particular ranking is Poe Dameron Freefall by Alex Segura. It was released on August 4th, 2020. It takes place 18 years after the Battle of Yavin. This is basically Poe Dameron's backstory. We get some info on how his mother, Shara Bay, died and what their relationship looked like. We know Shara Bay from the Shadowed Empire comics. We also know her from the current Star Wars comic running right now. And there were we see a lot of Shara. We see a lot of why there's a bunch of Shara in Poe Dameron. We see why those two got along so great and how Poe is basically a carbon copy of her. This novel does explain kind of his backstory and how he met Zori Bliss and how he became a spice runner. We also find out why she wanted him dead so badly in The Rise of Skywalker when he shows back up and she says she wants to splatter his brains all over the snow. We get that now. Now that I read that book, I'm like, totally get why she wanted him dead. Makes perfect sense. Totally get it. Poe was a dickhead. That's basically what it was. Now, this book, the way I felt about Poe's backstory kind of coming to light in episode 9. This is a whole nother conversation talking about episode 9, but I'll try to keep it focused on this. One of the problems that I had with episode 9 was the fact that they really started to touch on Poe's backstory in the last film of a trilogy. How he's doing the hot wiring and the hyperspace jumping and all this other stuff. But none of that was ever seen in the first 2 movies. You know what I'm saying? You can obviously tell that background was not there when they wrote Force Awakens and Last Jedi. They wanted to add a more 3-dimensional feel to Poe Dameron in the 3rd film, and it didn't make any sense whatsoever. Which is why they wrote this novel, was to kind of tell that story and kind of explain why he had those skills. And one of the things that they really retconned in the Rise of Skywalker film was when Zori makes the comment, when you left here and you ran off to join the Resistance. Well, we know from Before the Awakening that he didn't join the Resistance. He joined the New Republic Navy, and then from there went and joined the Resistance. And they fixed that line in the Rise of Skywalker novel, how she says when you ran off to join the cause. So they fixed that, tried to fix it. They tried to retcon that. But this novel explains why he left Kijimi, why he left everything behind and went and joined the New Republic. And it does show a little bit of Poe's relationship with his father, and basically how he ran away from Yavin 4 and to join these Spice Runners. Not a bad read, believe it or not. This is one I wasn't really excited for. I wasn't really looking forward to reading it, to be honest. Was not a bad read. It does, at some points, have that, I don't want to say that tweeny love story feel, because it's not really a love story feel in this one. There's no romance in this book at all between Poe and Zori, but the sexual tension between those two is insane. I'm going to say that. The sexual tension between those two is insane. And this whole story, you find out Bliss isn't even really, I don't want to say that's not the last name Zori goes by at first, because there's this whole other story about who it is she's related to and kind of the bloodline she comes from on Kijimi. I won't give it away, because it is kind of a big story twist in that part of the book right there where you find that out. So I won't tell you guys exactly who it is she's related to or where she comes from or anything like that. But like I said, it does make perfect sense as to why she wanted him off of Kijimi and told him to never come back. And it has a lot to do with where she comes from. So if you guys are interested in that story, I don't think this one is really essential reading. There's parts of it that I think would definitely help people understand episode 9 a little bit better. Help me understand episode 9 a little bit better. But I don't think it's essential reading. I really don't think so. So number 8 on my list this year is Poe Dameron Freefall. Number 7 on my list this year, and this one's a little bit different because this one isn't technically a novel, but I think it still belongs on this list, is Dooku Jedi Lost. Now, Dooku Jedi Lost by Cavan Scott is a little bit of a different situation. It's not, like I said, it's not technically a novel. This was an audiobook exclusive that was released back in April of 2019. I don't even think we talked about Dooku Jedi Lost on the last ranking either, because I hadn't read it yet. They ended up releasing a book version of it, which was basically the script. It wasn't actually a novel per se, but it was basically stage directions and the script and everything for the radio drama. They released that on October 1st, 2019. Not entirely sure where this book takes place, because there's two aspects to this story. There's the present day, quote unquote present day, where the story starts. And then there's all of the flashback stuff that's being told during the present day stuff. Now, the present day stuff is somewhere during the Clone Wars. Count Dooku has assigned Asajj Ventress to hunt down his sister. And she's basically learning Dooku's backstory through holograms that she's finding and these different records that Dooku has kept this whole time. And that's basically how the story of Dooku's past is being told. So I'm not entirely sure where the present day stuff is, but the flashback stuff is probably 15 to 20 years before Phantom Menace. We'll try to put it at that point. Try to nail it down right there. This explains Dooku's upbringing in the Order and why he felt so disconnected from the other Jedi, from the Order itself. And it even explains why he left the Order. In this story, I should say. In this story, we see Yoda take him on as a Padawan. We kind of see Yoda's method of training Dooku. And you can kind of understand some of Dooku's frustrations, to be completely honest. This is a very, very good story. It's a very good story. Now, I didn't listen to this audio drama when it first came out. What I did was I was waiting because I knew they were going to end up doing a print version of it. And they did. Ended up releasing in October. And when I picked it up, I realized it was the stage directions. So when I saw that, I was like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try something I've never done before. And I tried listening to the audio version while reading the book as well. Because I'm more of have a hard copy of the book in front of you. I'm more of an old school kind of guy when it comes to reading. Not a big fan of ebooks. I'm not a huge fan of audiobooks. I know there's people out there that love them. I totally get it. But I had a hard time listening to it and reading it at the same time because there was so much going on in the background in some of these scenes in the audio drama that had all of it in the book. And by the time you figured out where the main dialogue was taking place, you were already so far behind. It was unreal. So I ended up turning off the dramatization and I just read the screen directions, the stage directions. That's how I experienced this story. For me, I just sat and read the actual book itself. Absolutely loved this story. Absolutely loved it. We see in the story why Dooku knows he's the Count of Sereno, the planet of Sereno. We know why he knows, or we see why he knows and how he knows his backstory and his family history and everything like that. And if you thought Tarkin's parents were cold when you read the Tarkin novel, wait until you see how his father treated him. Basically, what happened was Dooku was left on the doorsteps of a church, that kind of thing, in a basket as an infant, and said, "Send a Jedi order because we don't want them. We don't want him." And there was so much resentment from his father towards him and whatnot for being that, for being born that way. So Dooku had a bit of a rough upbringing, and really delving into this book explains a lot of that. And it really does explain some of Asajj Ventress's background as well. When you do some of the present day stuff and you kind of find out about her former master, you find out she used to be a Jedi. You find out somewhat some of what her master was like and whatnot. So this is a really interesting read. This is one that I really enjoyed quite a bit. I probably need to go back and listen to the actual dramatization itself now that I've read the actual book and I know the story. Maybe I should go back and actually listen to it again. I think I'm going to do that at some point. But for you guys, if you guys are going to listen to this book, read this book, whichever, really think about it before you do it. Really think about which medium you want to experience this story in. It was originally intended as an audio drama, so maybe that's the way you feel like you need to experience it. Maybe you're more of a reader like I am, and you want to get the hardback version and actually just sit and read it. And maybe you want to try what I was trying to do and actually do both at the same time. No matter what, you're going to get the same story. I'm not going to say you're going to get the same experience, but you're going to get the same story. And I think this is a story that a lot of people would really enjoy. And I think this one fills in a lot of the blanks, especially when you read Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray and you really don't know what happened with Dooku, because Dooku's just radio silence. You know what I'm saying? So this book really does kind of build on that and really show the relationship between Dooku and Yoda, but it also shows the relationship between Dooku and Qui-Gon as well. So definitely check out Dooku, Jedi Lost. I think it's a great read, a great story. You guys won't be disappointed with that one. Moving on, number 6 this year on my ranking. This one's going to be a bit of a doozy to talk about. This one is From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back. 40 short stories celebrating 40 years of The Empire Strikes Back. This one was released on November 10th, 2020. Obviously takes place during The Empire Strikes Back. Now, this is the same, exact same format as From a Certain Point of View for Star Wars that came out 3 years ago. Exact same format. 40 short stories, 40 different authors. Out of these 40 stories, just like the Star Wars version of it, for the A New Hope From a Certain Point of View, there were some stories that you just kind of roll your eyes and you're just like, oh God, is this over yet? There are a couple of those in there. I'm not going to lie, there's a few stories in there that are really hard to get through. Things and people you just don't care about, that have no bearing on the story whatsoever. Except for maybe like 4 lines in the story. And you're like, oh, okay, so that was taking place during that. Other than that, has nothing to do. However, there are some stories in this book that are absolute gems. They are hidden gems, and you need to dig through everything else to find these stories. Some of these stories are absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. To the point where, just like with Star Wars from a certain point of view, how we had the short story Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, we ended up getting a novel called Master and Apprentice by Claudia, kind of building on that same relationship for those same two characters. There are some stories in this I would love to see full novels written around. Absolutely enjoyed some of these stories, and I've got four of them that I wanted to tell you guys about right off the top of my head. Notable stories in this collection. There's a story called Disturbance by Mike Chen. It is a Palpatine story, and it is from Palpatine's point of view. You guys remember in The Empire Strikes Back when the Emperor commands that Vader make contact with him, and as soon as he comes up, he says there is a great disturbance in the Force, and Vader says, "I felt it." And Palpatine goes on to say, "We have a new enemy, the young rebel who destroyed the Death Star. I have no doubt this boy is the offspring of Anakin Skywalker." What's really cool about the story is it is how the Emperor knew about this, and how he felt the disturbance and what form the disturbance took. And it was basically a vision that he had. And I don't want to give away too much in case you guys haven't read it, because this is the last novel to have come out on this list. This is the most recently released novel. So I don't want to ruin anything if you guys haven't seen it. But there's a story in there, but in this story, there's parts in the story where Palpatine is seeing basically what Vader wants at this point. Now, remember where this takes place. Vader knows Luke is his son from the comics. He knows that at this point. And when Palpatine is seeing what Vader wants, oh man, it's awesome. It is absolutely great. Yes, Luke Skywalker is involved, obviously, because, he knows about Luke Skywalker from The Empire Strikes Back, from that conversation they had. But when he sees how Vader wanted to rule everything as father and son, absolutely amazing. It is a great story. It is my number one favorite story in this collection this time around. Absolutely loved it. Another story that was really good in this book was called The First Lesson by Jim Zub. And it's basically Yoda messing with Luke when Luke lands on Dagobah, and how he's testing Luke, and every single thing he does to Luke during that first meeting is a test. Everything. He's looking at Luke about how he didn't pack for a long trip. He just packed for the trip to get there. And he's not very far-sighted. He's just thinking about the here and now, the same way Anakin always did. And there's ways that Yoda breaks down body language with Luke and what Luke's saying and what he's doing that really does have a lot to do. You can tell he's Anakin's son. And you may not realize it while you're watching the film, but upon reading the story, you're like, wow, yeah, he's right. That he was just like Anakin that way. So this is a great story. I was laughing during the story, especially when Yoda's basically like, this is going to be fun. And then that's when he goes and starts messing with him. You know what I'm saying? That's a great story. One of the really good hidden gems in this book is a story called Rendezvous Point by Jason Fry. And it's basically a Wedge and Tilly story. And Wedge is commissioned to put together a new squadron to go take out this ring of pirates that may or may not report the rebellion's location after they escaped Hoth. Great story. And honestly, I think it was the longest story in the book, if I'm not mistaken. And it was absolutely great. And this is another one that I really want to see an entire novel written around. I would love to see a novel written around this story and around this squadron again. There were parts in this story that I laughed, and it was just it kind of showed that camaraderie between pilots, even more so than even the Alphabet Squadron series has done. So I really, really did enjoy this story. And then the last story I wanted to tell you guys about in this particular novel is a story called Virgins by Tracy Dion, I think is how you say her name. And it's from the point of view of the cave itself on Dagobah. From the cave itself. Over the years, the cave has kind of developed its own self-awareness, if you would, which kind of makes the Kylo Ren comic book a little more tragic now that you know what happens with that cave and you know what Kylo does to it. But it's really interesting to see its relationship with Yoda, because we found out from this story that Yoda would go to that cave every few years and face his fears and to kind of learn to master that fear and to come to terms with what he did throughout the prequel trilogy and throughout the past. You know what I'm saying? And maybe some of his shortcomings and some of his downfalls. And it's really a great little story. It really is. I really enjoyed it. And when I first started reading it, I didn't realize it was from the point of view of the cave. And then when they finally say that, that it's the cave, I'm like, whoa, what? This is awesome. But the way they wrote it makes perfect sense that it would be self-aware. You know what I'm saying? So from a certain point of view, The Empire Strikes Back, this one, like I said, there's some stories that's hard to get through, but there's these hidden gems through there too. Absolutely amazing. I had a lot of fun reading it, and I'm really looking forward to, from a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi when it comes out in 3 years. So definitely go check that one out. I think I have this idea that I'd like to sit down and do a series talking about all the 40 short stories in all of these books so far. So in Star Wars from a certain point of view, and from Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view, I think I'd like to do a series talking about some of these side stories, go through and reread them again and kind of break them down and just do a series of videos on it. If you guys are interested in that, let me know. I'd like to hear you guys' opinion on that. So that is number 6 on my list this year. Number 5 is one that I'm kind of surprised ended up being, actually 4 and 5 both, are kind of higher on this list than I anticipated they would be before reading these books. Number 5 on my list is a book called Myths and Fables by George Mann. It was released on August 6th, 2019. There's really no definitive date on these stories on where they take place, and they're basically just legends within the Star Wars universe. These are stories that you can sit and wonder, are these canon or not? Like, what's going on with these? And they're told like legends, like somebody in the Star Wars universe is sitting down and telling these legends. And I could, honest to God, it would not surprise me at all to find out that there's a book somewhere called Myths and Fables in the Star Wars galaxy somewhere with these exact stories in it that kids listen to before they go to bed on whatever planet they live on. It would not surprise me one bit to find out that this is a book from inside the universe. Some notable stories in these, in this particular book. I think there was 6 or 7 stories, if I'm not mistaken. 3 of them really stood out to me and were absolutely amazing. The first one was the very first story in the book, The Knight and the Dragon. He's never identified by name, but you can obviously tell that this is Obi-Wan Kenobi versus a crate dragon. This is actually the first time. I don't want to say the first time. This came out before the season premiere of Mandalorian this past season, so this is the first time. I'll go ahead and say I think this is the first time you see a crate dragon in canon. So very, very good story. Tusken Raiders were involved in this story as well. Great story. Another story in this book is called Gaze of Stone, which really built on some Star Wars lore. Introduces a new Sith Lord named Darth Calduth. Calduth, I think is how you pronounce it. And his apprentice. And, there was always this, I don't want to say stigma. There was always this group of people that were really upset that the Sith homeworld was called Moraban in canon now instead of Korriban, the way it was in Legends. And this book basically says that it used to be called Korriban, and then it changed to Moraban at some point. So Korriban is canon again because of this story. But this story takes place I'm going to say thousands of years before the films, because it's not really explained in the book where the story takes place. And it follows the Sith Lord and his apprentice is trying to kind of rise up and take his role as master. You know what I'm saying? The way Sith Lords do. And wow, what a great story. Absolutely great story. You can read through these stories like 15 minutes. Totally good. Totally worth it. Great story though. Absolutely amazing. And that small amount of time that it takes to read the story, it adds so much to the lore. It's just insane. And even on the sequel book, which we'll talk about here in a minute, there's a story also that happens in that book that really does, it involves this story. This story takes place in the middle of that story. So it's really cool the way they're connected. And then the third story I wanted to talk about in this group of short stories was called The Dark Wraith, which is basically a Darth Vader story where Darth Vader was a scary bedtime story that parents told kids to make sure they behaved. That's basically what it was. They were trying to say, "Ooh, you better behave or the boogeyman, Darth Vader's going to come get you." And that's basically what this story was. Great read. Great read. And some of the artwork in this book is just absolutely phenomenal. I remember, it says in the book who illustrated it, but I don't remember off the top of my head, but whoever illustrated these images are just, oh God, even the cover of the book is a Jedi fighting a dragon. That would make an amazing poster. Every single piece of artwork in that book would make an amazing poster. Frame worthy, absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, man, Myths and Fables is a really, really good one, especially if you want some stories to read to your kids before they go to bed. This is a great one to pick up. And that's going to lead me right into number 4 as well, because number 4 is the sequel. I don't want to say the sequel book, but another book in that same vein, also by George Mann, called Dark Legends. It just came out on July 28th, 2020. Like I said, same with this book as the one before it. There's not a really good definitive date on when these stories take place. But some of the notable stories in this one, there's a story called The Orphanage, and it's basically a story of these kids at an orphanage who are being taken in the middle of the night by this creature. They have no clue who this creature is. And it's the Grand Inquisitor. He's coming to take Force-sensitive children, and this Jedi comes out of nowhere to protect them. You never find out who the Jedi is, but it's a Grand Inquisitor story. Really, really cool story. There's a story that I really, really enjoy called Buyer Beware. A man buys a mask, like a wooden mask at Doc Ondar's shop on Black Spire Outpost. And he tells him that this mask is cursed. And the way it's cursed, it's a really, really good read. When he puts the mask on, he can see through the eyes of the last person to wear it and how they amassed such wealth and all this other stuff and got people to fear them and respect them. And so he starts doing this stuff in his own right, in the world he lives in, and it's working the entire time. But little does he know that there's somebody else that's actually being affected by this mask as well. And it's going to end up leading to a serious crossroads. It's a great story. I don't want to give too much away if you guys haven't read it. Great story. Absolutely amazing. And then my favorite story in Dark Legends was a story called The Predecessor. And this story, I couldn't help but laugh while I was reading it. I really enjoyed this story quite a bit. It was an Imperial officer named Alger Denholm. And he just gets promoted one day. Out of nowhere. He's on a Star Destroyer. He just all of a sudden gets promoted and has no idea what happened to his predecessor. Has no idea. Now, you and I have an idea of what happened to his predecessor. Being around Vader, your lifespan tends to be a little bit shorter. You know what I'm saying? So, battlefield promotions happen pretty often when you're around Vader. But it gets to a point where it starts to drive this guy crazy because he does not know what happened to his predecessor. And he starts to have visions of his predecessor standing at the foot of his bed at night, choking and hovering off the ground, and this kind of ghost specter feel to it. And he starts to lose his mind. He starts to go crazy, and it starts to affect his work ethic to a point where he I don't want to give it away. He ends up being a victim of his own insanity. I'll just say that. And the insanity that he begins to feel ends up leading to something big for him and face to face with a certain somebody. So absolutely great story. It was a lot of fun to read. I mean, even when he'd see just the ghost of his predecessor walk at the end of the hallway, and he's like, oh, there he is. And he'd go chase him down, and there's nobody there. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of had that kind of ghost haunted ship kind of feel to it. Great story. So Dark Legends is a really good one as well. So Myths and Fables and Dark Legends both, I definitely think you guys need to pick them up. If you guys just want some, I don't want to say throwaway stories, but it's just something to buzz through real quick to get some good Star Wars stories, definitely go pick those two up. Absolutely awesome books, man. You're really going to love them. Number 3 this year on my ranking list is one that's going to surprise some people and catch some people off guard considering how I felt about the film. And I think that just basically gives it away. Number 3 on my list this year is the novelization for The Rise of Skywalker by Ray Carson. It was released on March 17th, 2020, and takes place during The Rise of Skywalker, 35 years ABY. Now, the reason this novel is so high on my list, and I know there's a lot of people out there right now going, are you serious? You're putting Rise of Skywalker that high? No. Hear me out. I'm not a fan of the Rise of Skywalker. If you've watched any of the episodes of the podcast, watch any video where I'm talking about the Rise of Skywalker, I'm not a fan of the Rise of Skywalker. I walked out of the theater after seeing it going, what the hell was that? No, that sucked. I'm done with it. And to this day, I still watch Rise of Skywalker and go, no, still hard to watch. Not a fan of it. But I'm going to back up 2 years real quick to The Last Jedi. This is probably where some people will probably turn the video off. When The Last Jedi first came out, I was a fan of it. When it first came out, I was a fan of it. I really, really liked The Last Jedi. And to this day, I still defend what they did with Luke Skywalker. But my thoughts on the film have changed drastically since The Rise of Skywalker came out. Now, if you'll think back to 2 years ago when that came out, everybody was obviously, you guys remember it. Everybody lost their minds over that movie, one way or the other. Everybody, best Star Wars movie ever. Some people, piece of crap. It was just everything. But what I told people when the novelization came out for The Last Jedi, when I read that, what I told people, even people who hated the film, I said, read the novel. Go check out the novel for The Last Jedi. It will redeem it in your eyes. I promise you. It may not make the movie watchable, but it will make the story itself make more sense, and it will really drive home what they were trying to do with that story. And I had several people come back afterwards saying, yeah, I read the novel for Last Jedi. I hated the movie. You're right. That was a great book. The Last Jedi makes an amazing novelization. It's an expanded edition, so it really adds to that story quite a bit, and it makes it make more sense. And just watching the movie, you look at it and you go, there's no way to make this movie make sense. There is a way to make that movie make sense. You read the novel, and you shouldn't have to. I completely agree. You shouldn't have to read a novel to make a movie make sense. But this novel for the Last Jedi made the movie make sense. Fast forward to 2 years ahead, a year ago when Rise of Skywalker came out. I was that guy that did not like the Rise of Skywalker at all. I wasn't excited about that movie. I was really let down by it. And as a matter of fact, I disliked that movie so much it ruined the rest of the sequel trilogy for me, because it's not a trilogy. It's 3 individual films. It's 3 sequel films. And each one had nothing to do with the one before. However, when the novelization came out for The Rise of Skywalker, I was one of those guys that came back and was like, you're right, that worked really well as a novelization. And I mentioned earlier how Resistance Reborn was a great prequel novel to the novelization of this book. I'm going to explain why here in a minute. This novel really does build on that story quite a bit. Yes, it does retcon a couple things that happened in the movie, like the Zori Bliss line about how Poe ran off to join the Resistance. It does retcon that. It does try to fix that, quote unquote. But there are moments in this novel that are payoff moments for people who keep up on the canon material. For everybody that reads all of this stuff and watches all of this stuff, there are payoff moments in the novelization for The Rise of Skywalker that were not in the film, that should have been in the film. After reading the novel for The Rise of Skywalker, which I love, it makes me hate the movie that much more because I realize what could have been in the movie. There are characters popping up at the last minute in this book from other mediums, from other novels, from video games, from TV shows. There's all these other characters popping up that should have been in the film that weren't. And don't get me wrong, The Rise of Skywalker, it's still not a perfect story. But this novelization really made it more bearable for me, to the point where I made a video a while back posing the question, because I think I got a mailbag question asking if I thought the sequel trilogy made more sense as novels. And yeah, I don't think that they should have ever made the sequel trilogy as films. I think they should have said, look, here's the continuation. We're just going to make them novels the way the Legends novels did, the old EU, and we're just going to do that, and we're going to make some standalone movies, like Rogue One and Solo. I know there's people out there that like it. I'm not huge on Solo, but maybe they should have done that and not worried about making a proper 7, 8, and 9 in the films. So if you were not a fan of The Rise of Skywalker, at least go give it a chance in the novel. Because I'm going to say the same thing I did for The Last Jedi. If you weren't a fan of the movie, go check out the novel. Because, yeah, that novel really did redeem it in my eyes. I really, really enjoyed the novelization of Rise of Skywalker. And there's even scenes toward the beginning of the book as well that were cut from the movie, and I can't figure out why. These scenes should have been in the damn movie on Mustafar, and some of the characters that Kylo comes across and stuff like it makes total sense. You know, in The Rise of Skywalker, when Leia dies, it takes Maz Kanata looking at the camera and basically breaking the fourth wall to tell the audience what's going on. In the novel, it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? So definitely at least give it a shot. Go check it out. And remember, I hated Rise of Skywalker. I hate it with a burning passion. And this novel is number 3 on my list, if that tells you anything at all. So definitely go check out the Rise of Skywalker novelization. Ray Carson did an amazing job bringing that story to a novel format. Go check it out. I promise you guys, you won't be disappointed. We're down to the final 2, guys. We've been going, over an hour? We're down to the final 2. Number 2 on my list is a novel that came out in 2019. It is Thrawn Treason by Timothy Zahn. Came out July 23rd. It takes place about 1 year before the Battle of Yavin. It leads right up to that Rebels finale from Season 4. And this is the 3rd Thrawn novel in that first Thrawn trilogy that Timothy Zahn did. We had Thrawn Alliances, and then we had Thrawn Treason. And all 3 of those books kind of take place in the same time period, kind of interweave with Rebels a little bit, especially the 2nd and 3rd book, but kind of interweave with Rebels a little bit. Thrawn Treason is an amazing novel. It's a great book, especially if you really love Thrawn. And Director Krennic from Rogue One is in this novel as well. Tarkin has a pretty good part to play in this novel. And basically what's going on is, we've got Director Krennic with his Project Stardust, which is the Death Star. And we've got Thrawn with his project, the TIE Defender project that we saw in Rebels. And they both need funding, but only one of them is going to get funding. And so basically what happens is Tarkin, who is on Thrawn's side, by the way, we see that in Rogue One. He's not a fan of Director Krennic. He's on Thrawn's side with his TIE Defender program. He puts Thrawn up to this challenge saying, if you can figure out what's going on with these saboteurs for the Project Stardust, you'll get the funding. That's basically what it is. And Director Krennic is, I think Krennic sent one of his aides to keep tabs on Thrawn the whole time to make sure that Thrawn wasn't going to win because he really wanted Stardust finished. And it's a really, really great novel. It takes Thrawn almost to the edge of treason, basically because the problems that the saboteur problem that Tarkin put him up to fixing has a lot to do with what's going on in the unknown regions with the Chiss Ascendancy, and we see some other Chiss come in to what we now know as what they refer to as lesser space, into the actual Star Wars galaxy itself, and kind of give Thrawn some help. Great novel. I liked this one a lot more than I did Thrawn Alliances. And I really, I still enjoyed Thrawn Alliances. It had its problems, but this one is a really great cap to that trilogy. And like I said, it butts right up to his appearance in Rebels Season 4 and kind of where those characters ended up at. If you guys seen Rebels, you know what I'm talking about. And that's kind of the end of that story, really, up until if we ever find out what happened to Thrawn and Ezra. Great novel. Great cap to that trilogy, and that entire first trilogy for Thrawn, I think I'm going to say it's essential reading. I think those 3 novels are really, really good together, especially if you can sit and read them back to back, and I think absolutely amazing. So Thrawn Treason is number 2 on my list. We're down to the last one, guys, and if you guys have been keeping track of novels that have been coming out in the last year, you already know what novel this is. Number 1 on my list for the last year and a half that's come out is Thrawn Ascendancy Chaos Rising by Timothy Zahn. This one was released on September 1st of 2020. It takes place about 19 years before the Battle of Yavin. And it's basically during the Clone Wars is when this story takes place. It's the first in a trilogy of novels. The second book is coming out early next year. I believe it's titled Greater Good. And what's cool about this novel is it has nothing to really do with, I don't want to say nothing to really do with, because I'm going to talk about here in a second. It's the story itself is kind of set outside of what the other Thrawn trilogy was. This one is basically Thrawn's upbringing, how he kind of progressed through the Chiss, I don't want to say the ascendancy, but through the military ranks. You kind of see how the Chiss ascendancy works, how that government is kind of structured, and how, certain parts of it are integral to the military and whatnot. And kind of what's going on in the unknown regions and, around Chiss space and what's going on in the chaos is what they refer to the unknown regions as. Great novel. This is my absolute favorite book that's come out in the last year and a half. I love this book. Absolutely adore it. There's also a part in this book that crosses over with Thrawn Alliances. Now, if you have read Thrawn Alliances, you know that book cuts back and forth between Vader and Thrawn and Anakin and Thrawn. And basically the entire Anakin and Thrawn aspect of Thrawn Alliances happens during this book. There's even a part where he goes to what they call lesser space, and you see these entire conversations that Anakin had with Thrawn, but from Thrawn's point of view. And you basically, you can read half of Thrawn Chaos Rising and then get to that point and then stop and read Thrawn Alliances and then go back and finish this book. It even says he was gone for so many weeks and then comes back in the middle of that book. So an entire another Thrawn novel happens in the middle of this one, just in the course of a paragraph. It's absolutely cool the way they were kind of crossed over. This novel really does a good job of setting up its own trilogy. It's its own self-contained story, beginning, middle, end, but it also does a really good job of setting up the story moving forward and kind of leading up to where I think we're going to see Thrawn in the beginning of the first book of the first trilogy. It's kind of weird how these trilogies, you got the first trilogy, now you're doing this prequel trilogy of Thrawn, and kind of how they're crossing over with one another. Absolutely amazing. I can't wait to see where this trilogy is going to go. The characters are engaging. And if you want more and more Thrawn, this is the Thrawn that you absolutely love. There's something about Thrawn that everybody loves so much, how genius he is and how smart he is when it comes to military tactics and whatnot. And you really get to see that utilized a lot, especially against a foe now that you really didn't think he was going to be able to beat, because his foe is also almost on that same level of tactical genius. And so you start to do this thing, you start to see this thing where Thrawn is like, well, he's going to expect me to do this, but I'm going to do this. But the problem is he would expect me to do this instead of this, so I'm going to do this instead of that. And it starts to do this overlapping thing over and over again. It was absolutely awesome to read. I know there are some people that have had kind of a hard time getting into this novel. Totally understandable. I get where they're coming from, because it happens outside of everything else that we're used to seeing. This is some advanced Star Wars stuff that's outside of the galaxy that we all know and love. What's going on with the Republic and the Separatists and everything like that. So this is kind of its own thing. This isn't a place, I think, if you've never read a canon novel before and you're wanting to get into it, I would not start with this novel because of everything else that's going on. You almost have to read the other Thrawn trilogy before reading this one to really know what's going on. So absolutely dumbfounded by this book. Anything Timothy Zahn writes is just amazing. And I think that's the general consensus. Anything Claudia Gray writes or Timothy Zahn, as far as I'm concerned, they're the king and queen of Star Wars at this point. And there's a reason why both Timothy Zahn novels were at the top of this list. It has nothing to do with them being written by Timothy Zahn. It's just they're that good. The quality of those novels are that high. So that is my ranking for everything that's come out since May of 2019. And I will say this also. There's one book that I didn't mention on this list, and there's a reason I haven't mentioned it. It goes along the same lines as what Dooku Jedi Lost was. And Dr. Aphra, the audiobook, is absent on this list because the audio drama is out now. But for me personally, because I was more of a book reader for Dooku Jedi Lost, I'm waiting on the hardback version of this to come out, which is coming out, I think, in April, if I'm not mistaken, April 6th of 2021. So that novel is going to end up being on next year's ranking list at the end of 2021. So keep an eye out for that also. Now, I'm sure you guys are probably wondering where these novels all sit on the main ranking. I put together a graphic. I'm going to throw that up for you. And I've highlighted the novels that we talked about tonight and kind of placed them in the overall ranking for you guys to kind of check out. You guys can pause the video or whatever if you really want to go through the list, but they are all there. So that is my personal ranking of the novels that have come out. As I said at the beginning of the video, your ranking will most likely be different from mine, and that's okay. I don't necessarily want everybody to agree with me. If we all agreed all the time, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. So let me know in the comment section below, guys. What is your ranking of these books? Do you guys want to just give me rankings of what's come out in the last year? Give me rankings of your entire list so far, which is kind of a huge list, just saying. Yeah, I want to hear what you guys have to say. I really do. What do you agree with? What do you not agree with? Keep the conversation going, but all I ask is keep it civil, because I know Star Wars has a tendency to be really good toxicity fuel, if you will. So here at the Star Wars Canon Podcast, we value opposing opinions and healthy debates, because we are all right, and yet we're all wrong at the same time. There's no such thing as a right or wrong opinion. So let me know, guys, what you think of this ranking and where you guys agree and where you differ. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me for this long haul as we went through these novels. Don't forget, there is a comic version of this video coming as well. I'm working on that now as we speak. I don't have an exact date for when that video is going to be released, but it should be in the next week and a half, something like that. So stay tuned. Definitely want to check that one out as well. Don't forget that after the first of the year, the Star Wars Canon Podcast is coming back, and we're going to be hitting High Republic really, really hard. I know the crew for the Canon Podcast is really excited to be talking High Republic, and we're excited to be getting our hands on some of that stuff. So those High Republic novels will be on next year's ranking. We'll see where they fall, and we'll see what 2021 has to offer in the way of Star Wars novels this year. So thanks again for tuning in, guys. And as always, may the Force be with you.